Hi, welcome to Architecture Engineered. My name is Ryan and we are your one-stop design team. In this presentation, I'm going to go through the self-build made easy process in 15 minutes or less. So if you think about your self-build as a journey, like all journeys, it helps to have a map to take along with you to make sure you're going on the right route. To help self-builders like yourself, I've put together one map to help you along on your self-build journey. I break down the self-build process into 3 key stages: the brief stage, the design stage, the build stage. And at each stage, there are 3 key steps to take. If you follow this process, it makes it so much easier to make sure that you go along your journey in a very concise way. So if that might be of interest to you, please continue to watch on this presentation. I'm going to go through each particular one in a very high level manner because there's only so much we can cover in 15 minutes or less. So the first stage is the brief stage, and this generally is left down to the self-builder on their own. They need to make sure you set the targets in terms of your budget, set what you want, and then also need to find land. There are various people out there or organizations that can help you along on that. For example, in the center, there is the Build Store that will help you set your budgets and arrange finance for you. They also have a system of finding land for you as well. But the key one is to make sure you define what your wants are and must-haves and must-not-haves in your build. The next stage is the design stage, and this is where we predominantly come in as designers. We need to first appoint your design team, then brief your design team, and then design your home with your design team. But why is it important to have a great designer? Well, once you're on site, it's going to cost you a lot more to make any changes. So any changes at design stage is significantly less. So as you probably appreciate, to move a wall on a piece of paper is very easy to do. But to remove a wall on site is a lot harder. And in most cases, you just leave the wall there where it's being built. Also, the other purpose of the design is to put together a tender package. Unlike going to a car dealership where you get given a brochure with the exact prices, it's actually down to the self-builders to actually tell contractors or builders what you want so they can then price for that. If your brief is a bit woolly, there's always going to be some form of ambiguity. And how I kind of summarize it is that clients want a Ferrari, who wouldn't, but most people can't afford that, and you have to settle for something else. And most contractors would want to give you a Mini, but then charge you the same price as a Lamborghini. And the main purpose of what we do as designers is to make sure that the contractor knows what you want and need and must have, and also you have the confidence that you're getting what you want and need and must have. So both parties know exactly what is going to be built. And at this stage, you want to know if you can't afford it, because you can always tweak it. It's too late to find out halfway through the construction phase that you can't afford a certain element. You either then need to value engineer something else or do something else altogether. So that is the main reason why design is so important, is to make sure that you draw that line in the sand. So let's go back to the 3 key steps. So you need to appoint your design team. So you might be thinking that all you need is an architect and that's it. Probably about 10 years ago, that was probably about fine because homes were relatively quite simple, but they did use a lot of energy. And as a result, the government has brought in tougher CO2 targets, but then as self-builders, you want to reduce your carbon footprint as much as possible. And also your expectations of your dream home is going to be a bit more than just a bulk standard off-the-shelf one. So as a result, there's a lot more technology that goes into it. So you need to have a bit more of a cohesive team. And how I summarize that is you need to have an architect who is in charge of how the building is going to look, sustainability consultant who's going to help make sure you don't, to minimize your carbon as much as possible. You'll have a structural engineer to help and define how the building will stand up. And then you'll have an M&E consultant to help define how your building will work. You also might need to have someone to help you along on your contracts to make sure that you have a decent contract in place between you and the contractor. In reality, you won't need to appoint 5 different people. More often than not, the architect will take on the contract administrator role or the contract support. The M&E engineer will take on the sustainability role, and the structural engineer will just concentrate on the civils as well as the structure itself. So once you've appointed your design team, then you need to brief your design team. They need to know your wants, needs, must-haves, and must-not-haves. But also they need to know your budget as well as your timeframes to make sure they can try and hit those as well. Once you've laid that out, you can then move on to the next step, and that is to design your home with your design team. And that is a very enjoyable process. It takes time to do it, and it's very important to do it properly because you're never going to get to the end result straight away. It is an iterative process, and if you're doing it properly, it's very enjoyable. So once you get to a stage where you feel that you've got the home, your dream home on paper, you can then move on to tendering your project. And that means you go out to the market to get a competitive price for various builders. And then once you've got the price back, you can then move on to the next stage, which is your build stage. The build stage. So this is the last stage before you can move into your dream home. And I break it down into 3 steps. You negotiate with your contractor, you detail with your contractor and your design team, and then you build your home with your design team and your contractor. So negotiation with your contractor. And why is that important to allow time for that? Well, you would have had a tender price back from a number of contractors or builders, whichever terminology you want to use. But what normally happens is they do come in slightly over budget, and you want to have a certain degree of time to do what's called value engineering, which really means get it slightly cheaper. So you want to work with your contractor and also want to work with the second contractor on that list to see if you can bring the price down to within your budget or find better value within the contract. Because every single contractor has their own way of doing things, but also their own supply chains, and they might be able to offer an alternative that is slightly cheaper, but at the same time doesn't make a huge difference to your building. So once you've got a contract in place and you're happy with the price that you've agreed to pay, you can then move on to detailing with your design team and contractor. This step doesn't really get done that well in the residential market because many people want to just get onto site straight away. But contractors have their own preferred way of building a building, and architects and other designers have their way of building and designing a building, but sometimes they don't fully align. So it's important to make sure that sort of negotiations happen as early on as possible. Like I said earlier, any sort of change at design is so much cheaper than when you're on site. So once you've carried out that detail, you can now move on to building your dream home. So your involvement will differ depending on what contract you have in place. If you have a single contractor, which is called a main contractor or a complete builder, that your involvement will be relatively low. Or if you're project managing the whole project yourself, then you're going to be doing a lot of work. In reality, most self-builders do something in between because it is your passion project. It's going to be your forever home for most people. So they want to make sure that they get what they want. But again, you can have as little involvement or as much involvement as you want. So what actually goes on when you're actually building your building? Well, obviously, there are many types of ways to build buildings and etc. I'm not going to go through that, and every single process is different, but there are some key elements. Generally, what happens is you become the cash machine for the build process. You need to make sure that you have the right cash throughout the whole build process and make sure that tallies up with what the builder wants throughout the process. So your contract administrator will give you a cash flow forecast, and you need to just make sure that lines up with your finance team. But what happens actually on site is you should be having formal meetings every month at least. Most meetings will be every other week actually, and they will set out what the progress has been, and they'll also set out any problems, etc. Then also the contract administrator will check how much money that the contractor is asking for the money and then ask you to pay him. And it's relatively quite simple, and that gets repeated throughout the process up until the point where you're coming to the end of your project. And that's when your contract administrator will then check the building with the design team to make sure the contractor has built what you paid for them to do. In reality, what should be happening is your design team should be periodically visiting site and making sure the contractor is going in the right direction. Because let's all be honest, some contractors will try and cut corners, But in reality, what will happen is that they might miss something out by accident. So that's why it's always important to have your design team to go and visit the site so they can pick that up early so your project actually gets built the way you want it. So you get close to your end date, and then you will get your team to start doing all the handover documents, etc. And to be honest, they will put together what's called a snag list or a non-compliance list. So you get to the end of the process, and then we get something called handover, and that is when you take ownership of the site again and you can now move in. So that is pretty much your self build process done. The last thing that you need to do in a year's time or 2 years' time, depending on what's in your contract, is carry out a final inspection, and that's what's called a retention period. Because what you want to do is hold back a portion of your money for a year to make sure if any problems, you want to make sure that it gets dealt with during that retention period. And if the contractor doesn't do the work, you can then use the remaining money and get another contractor on board. But if you've gone to a reputable contractor in the first place, there wouldn't be any problems doing that. So that is the South Build Made Easy process. If you follow those steps, hopefully it'll be much easier to build your dream home. And that's been based on various other maps out there and many years of working on various types of buildings. If you want to know a little bit more about architecture engineering, please visit our board in the professional section and scan our board. We can send you some more information. What we are is a one-stop design team, so you don't need to go out to various design consultants. We put together a cohesive team that meets your needs. Also, you can visit southbuildmadeeasy.co.uk, where you can get a copy of my ebook where I run through the South Build Made Easy process in a greater level of detail. It also includes a checklist and a budget planner, which can be very useful for your self build. I will also include this presentation in as well. So thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation, and I hope you enjoy your day at the centre. Thank you.